What happens when a duchess meets her match in one of television's most unforgiving interviewers? The answer involves accusations, denials, and a confrontation that spiraled so far out of control that security had to be called. This is the story of how Meghan Markle's appearance on Kevin O'Sullivan's show became the most talked-about television disaster of the year. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story has twists you won't see coming. Kevin O'Sullivan adjusted his glasses as he looked across the studio table at his guest. The Duchess of Sussex sat poised, her media training evident in every calculated gesture. The studio lights cast sharp shadows, creating an atmosphere that felt more like an interrogation room than a television set. "Your Royal Highness," Kevin began, his voice carrying that familiar edge that regular viewers knew meant trouble was brewing. "Let's start with something simple. Your recent charity work has been making headlines, but some critics are questioning the actual impact of your initiatives." Meghan's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "I think it's important to focus on the positive change we're creating, rather than giving energy to negativity. The communities we're working with have seen real transformation." Kevin leaned forward, his pen tapping rhythmically against his notepad. Real transformation. That's an interesting phrase, because according to financial records obtained by several news outlets, your Archewell Foundation spent more on legal fees and administrative costs than it did on actual charitable giving. How do you respond to that? The studio fell silent, except for the soft hum of cameras. Meghan's media training kicked in as she straightened her shoulders. Those reports are taken out of context. Building a sustainable foundation requires investment. In infrastructure and legal compliance, we're thinking long-term, not just writing checks for photo opportunities. Photo opportunities. Kevin's eyebrows raised. Speaking of which, there seems to be a photographer present at every single one of your charitable appearances. Some might argue that's exactly what this is about. Meghan's composure began to crack. "I find it interesting that when other public figures engage in philanthropy, it's celebrated, but when I do it, my motives are questioned. There's a pattern here that I think your viewers are intelligent enough to recognize." Kevin set down his pen and looked directly into the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll be diving deeper into some very specific allegations that have been made against our guest. Don't go anywhere, because this conversation is just getting started." As the commercial break began, the tension in the studio was palpable. Meghan shifted uncomfortably in her seat, whispering something to her assistant, who had moved closer to the set. Kevin reviewed his notes, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When the cameras rolled again, Kevin's demeanor had shifted from merely challenging to openly confrontational. "Welcome back. We're here with Meghan Markle, and before the break, we were discussing her charitable foundation. But I want to shift gears and talk about something that's been troubling a lot of people." Meghan's hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm here to have an honest conversation." "Kevin, good, because honesty is exactly what we need. There are allegations that you've been using your royal connections to secure lucrative deals for your entertainment ventures, while simultaneously playing the victim about your treatment by the royal family. How do you square that circle?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. "That's not just unfair, it's completely false. I've never leveraged my royal connections for personal gain. In fact, I've been deliberately careful to maintain clear boundaries between my past role and my current work." Kevin pulled out a stack of papers. "I have copies of emails here that suggest otherwise. Communications between your representatives and major streaming platforms that specifically reference your royal status as a selling point for your projects. Would you like me to read them?" Meghan's voice rose slightly. "You're taking private business communications out of context to create a narrative that simply isn't true. This is exactly the kind of media manipulation that drove me and Harry to step back from royal duties in the first place. Media manipulation." Kevin's laugh was cold. "That's rich coming from someone who's given multiple tell-all interviews, painting herself as a victim while simultaneously profiting from the very royal status she claims to have been victimized by." The studio audience began to murmur. Meghan looked around, clearly feeling the room turn against her. "I'm not going to sit here and be attacked based on false premises and selective presentation of facts. This isn't journalism, it's character assassination." Kevin leaned back in his chair. Character assassination. Strong words. But let's talk about character for a moment. You've made very serious allegations about racism within the royal family. Allegations that have damaged the reputation of an institution that has served this country for over 1,000 years. Don't you think the British public deserves more than vague innuendo? Meghan's composure finally cracked completely. How dare you minimize the racism that I experienced? How dare you suggest that my truth is somehow less valid than the reputation of an institution that protected its image over its people? Your truth. Kevin's voice was sharp now. That's an interesting phrase, because truth is supposed to be universal, isn't it? Either something happened, or it didn't. Either someone said something, or they didn't. You can't have multiple versions of the truth. The confrontation was escalating rapidly, and everyone in the studio could feel the tension reaching a breaking point. Meghan stood up from her chair, her microphone still attached. I don't have to sit here and be lectured about truth by someone who's built his career on tearing people down. Kevin remained seated, his voice calm but cutting. I've built my career on asking difficult questions that other people are afraid to ask. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps the problem isn't with my questions, but with your answers. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter as Meghan remained standing, her hands trembling slightly with rage. Kevin O'Sullivan sat perfectly still, his eyes never leaving her face, waiting for her next move like a predator watching wounded prey. Sit down, Your Royal Highness, Kevin said, his voice dripping with mock formality. We're not finished here. Meghan's voice was ice cold. Actually, we are finished. I came here expecting a professional interview, not an ambush designed to humiliate me on national television. Kevin finally stood, matching her energy. An ambush. I sent you a list of topics we'd be covering. Your people approved every single one. If you can't handle basic questions about your public statements and business dealings, then perhaps you shouldn't be making public statements or engaging in business dealings. The camera operators continued filming, knowing they were capturing television gold. Meghan's assistant stepped forward, but she waved him away with a sharp gesture. Basic questions. Meghan's laugh was bitter. You've spent the last 15 minutes trying to discredit everything I've said and done since leaving the royal family. You've questioned my integrity, my motives, and now you're questioning my right to defend myself. Kevin walked around the desk, closing the distance between them. I'm questioning your consistency. You can't simultaneously claim to be a victim of an oppressive institution, while also capitalizing on your connection to that same institution. You can't demand privacy while giving tell-all interviews. You can't claim to want out of the spotlight, while courting media attention at every opportunity. Meghan's eyes flashed dangerously. You want to talk about consistency? Let's talk about how you've treated other members of the royal family. When Prince William faces criticism, you defend him. When Prince Charles had scandals, you made excuses. But when it comes to me, suddenly you're this crusading journalist demanding accountability. Those are completely different situations, Kevin shot back. They didn't go on international television making accusations. They refused to substantiate. They didn't sign multi-million-dollar deals while complaining about being mistreated. They didn't abandon their duties and then expect continued respect and deference. The studio audience was completely silent now, everyone sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Meghan took a step closer to Kevin, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You want substantiation? Fine. Let's talk about the conversation where a senior royal expressed concerns about how dark my son's skin might be. Let's talk about being denied mental health support when I was struggling. Let's talk about being told I couldn't get help because it would reflect poorly on the family. Kevin's response was immediate and brutal. Let's talk about why you won't name names. Let's talk about why these earth-shattering revelations only came out after you'd secured your exit strategy and your Netflix deal. Let's talk about why your version of events keeps changing depending on which interviewer you're speaking to. Meghan's composure shattered completely. My version keeps changing. I've been consistent from the beginning. The only thing that's changed is that I've finally found my voice, and I'm no longer willing to be silenced by people like you who benefit from keeping the status quo intact. People like me. Kevin's voice rose for the first time. I'm a journalist doing my job. I'm asking the questions that millions of people want answered. If you can't handle scrutiny, then don't put yourself in positions that require it. Meghan spun around to face the camera directly. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the kind of treatment that made my life unbearable. This is why Harry and I had to leave. Because asking legitimate questions about institutional racism and mental health support is somehow seen as an attack on tradition." Kevin moved to block her view of the camera. "Don't you dare try to play the victim card on my show. You came here as a guest, not as a victim. You agreed to this interview, you knew what kind of show this is, and now you're trying to manipulate the audience because you don't like being held accountable." The confrontation reached a new level of intensity. As Meghan whirled back to face him, manipulate the audience, that's exactly what you're doing. You're using your platform to continue the same pattern of harassment that forced me out of public life in the first place. Harassment? Kevin's voice was incredulous. Asking you to explain your public statements is harassment? Questioning inconsistencies in your story is harassment. Expecting you to provide evidence for serious allegations is harassment. If that's harassment, then every journalist in the world is a harasser. Meghan's voice cracked with emotion. "You're twisting everything I say. You're not interested in my answers. You're interested in catching me in what you perceive as contradictions. This isn't an interview, it's a prosecution." Kevin saw his opening and pressed harder. "If you feel like you're being prosecuted, perhaps it's because you have something to hide. Perhaps it's because your story doesn't hold up under basic scrutiny. Perhaps it's because you've been protected by sympathetic interviewers for so long that you forgot what real accountability looks like." The studio fell into stunned silence as Meghan stared at Kevin with undisguised hatred. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I don't have to take this," she said quietly, her voice shaking with rage. "I don't have to sit here and be humiliated by a bitter man who's built his career on destroying people's reputations." Kevin's smile was cold. "You're absolutely right. You don't have to take this. You can walk away, just like you walked away from your royal duties. You can quit, just like you quit acting when it got too difficult. You can run, just like you ran from every challenge you've ever faced." The words hit Meghan like physical blows. She stood there for a moment, trembling with fury, before making a decision that would define the rest of the interview. "You know what?" she said, her voice suddenly calm and deadly. "You want to know the truth? The real truth? Fine. Let's talk about the real truth about what goes on behind closed doors in that family. Let's talk about the things they made me promise never to reveal." Kevin's eyes widened slightly. This was not the direction he had expected the interview to take. "I'm listening." Meghan looked directly into the camera, her voice clear and unwavering. "The person who made those comments about my son's skin color? It was—" She paused, and the silence stretched out like a held breath. Kevin leaned forward, sensing that whatever came next would either make or break both their careers. The studio held its collective breath as Meghan stood frozen, her mouth open, ready to deliver what could be the most explosive revelation in royal history. Kevin O'Sullivan leaned forward, his journalistic instincts screaming that he was about to witness television history. But then something shifted in Meghan's expression. Her eyes darted to the cameras, to the studio audience, to her assistant, who was frantically shaking his head from the sidelines. The weight of what she was about to say seemed to hit her all at once. It was ... She began again, then stopped, her voice catching. "It was exactly what I said in my previous interviews. I'm not going to be manipulated into saying something I'll regret just because you've pushed me to my breaking point." Kevin's disappointment was palpable. "So we're back to vague accusations and unnamed sources. How convenient." Meghan's anger reignited instantly. "Convenient? You think any of this has been convenient for me? You think I enjoy having my life dissected on national television? You think I wanted to become a target for every conspiracy theorist and racist troll on the internet? You chose this, Kevin," said brutally, "every single bit of it. You chose to marry into the royal family, knowing full well what that entailed. You chose to do the tell-all interviews. You chose to sign the entertainment deals. You chose to keep your royal titles while attacking the institution that gave them to you. Stop pretending you're a victim of circumstances beyond your control." Meghan's voice rose to near shouting. "I chose to marry the man I love. I didn't choose to be subjected to a campaign of harassment and character assassination. I didn't choose to have my mental health ignored. I didn't choose to have my child's safety threatened by the very institution that was supposed to protect us." Kevin slammed his hand on the desk. "Then why won't you name names? Why won't you provide specifics? Why won't you give us something concrete instead of these dramatic generalizations? If these things really happened the way you say they did, then you should be able to prove it. Because some things are bigger than television ratings," Meghan shot back. "Because some things are about protecting people I care about, even when they didn't protect me. Because, unlike you, I understand that words have consequences beyond making good television." Kevin's laugh was harsh. "Protecting people you care about. Is that what you call it? You've spent years publicly undermining the royal family, while claiming to take the high road. You've made millions of dollars trading on your royal connections, while simultaneously trashing the institution that made those connections valuable." Meghan turned to face the camera again, speaking directly to the audience. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the kind of treatment that made my life unbearable. No matter what I say, no matter how I try to explain my experience, it gets twisted into something ugly and manipulative." Kevin stepped in front of the camera, blocking her view of the audience. "Don't you dare try to play to the cameras. You came on this show as a guest, not as a victim, giving testimony. If you can't handle the interview, then leave. The door is right there." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Meghan stared at Kevin for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with barely controlled rage. "You know what?" she said quietly, her voice deadly calm. "You're right. I don't have to take this. I don't have to sit here and be ambushed by a small-minded man who gets his kicks from humiliating people on television." She reached up and unclipped her microphone, letting it drop to the floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the studio. Kevin's eyes widened in shock. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "I'm leaving," Meghan said simply. "This interview is over." Kevin's professional instincts kicked in. "You can't just leave in the middle of an interview. We're live on television." Meghan's smile was cold and triumphant. "Watch me." She took a step toward the studio exit, but Kevin moved to block her path. "You agreed to a full hour. You have contractual obligations. You can't just walk away because you don't like the questions." "Get out of my way," Meghan said, her voice low and dangerous. Kevin didn't budge. "This is my show. Control the narrative here. You don't get to leave on your terms." The confrontation reached its breaking point as Meghan raised her voice for the entire studio to hear. "I said get out of my way. I'm done with this charade." Kevin's response was, swift and cutting, "Fine, run away. Add this to your list of things you've quit when they got too difficult. But don't expect the British public to have any sympathy for you after this display." Meghan spun around, her face flushed with fury. "Display? You want to talk about displays? You've spent the last 40 minutes trying to destroy my reputation on national television, and you're talking about my display. I've spent the last 40 minutes asking you legitimate questions that you refuse to answer," Kevin fired back. "If that's destroying your reputation, then maybe the problem is with your reputation, not with my questions." The studio audience began to murmur as the confrontation spiraled completely out of control. Meghan's assistant finally stepped forward, clearly trying to de-escalate the situation. "Your Grace, perhaps we should," he began. But Meghan cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not leaving quietly. I'm not slinking away while this man continues to spread lies about me." Kevin seized on her words. "Lies? What lies? Everything I've said has been based on public records, your own statements, and documented facts. If you think those are lies, then perhaps you should reconsider some of your own public statements." The final straw came when Meghan looked directly at Kevin and said, "You know what your problem is? You're terrified of successful women who refuse to be silenced. You can't handle the fact that I've built a successful career despite everything you and people like you have thrown at me." Kevin's response was immediate and brutal. "Successful career? You mean the career built entirely on your royal connections? The career that exists only because you married into the most famous family in the world? The career that would disappear tomorrow if you gave up your royal titles?" The words hit Meghan like physical blows. She stood there for a moment, trembling with rage, before making one final devastating statement. "You're pathetic," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned studio. "You're a bitter, irrelevant man who's built his entire identity around tearing other people down. And the saddest part is, You actually think you're doing something important." With that, she turned and walked toward the studio exit. Kevin called, "After her security, don't let her leave. She has contractual obligations." But Meghan was already at the door, her assistant scrambling to follow her. She paused for just a moment, turned back to look at the camera one last time, and said, "This is exactly why we left. This is exactly what we were trying to escape." And with that, she was gone, leaving Kevin standing alone in the studio, the camera still rolling, capturing his stunned expression as he realized that his biggest interview had just become his biggest disaster. The silence stretched on for several long seconds before Kevin finally looked into the camera and said, "Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've all learned something about character today." But even as he tried to maintain his composure, everyone in the studio knew that something had fundamentally changed. The interview that was supposed to be Kevin O'Sullivan's triumph had become something else entirely, a moment that would define both their careers in ways neither of them could have anticipated. So what do you think? Did Meghan Markle have the right to walk out, or should she have stayed and answered Kevin's questions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more explosive interviews and behind-the-scenes drama that you won't find anywhere else.